一是要坚持正确的战略认知，落实双方是合作伙伴而不是对手，互为机遇而不是威胁的定位；二是把握睦邻友好的方向，共同来维护好边境地区的和平和稳定。
Good evening and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Wen-Ti Song. Following the 2020 border clashes between India and China, relations between the two countries have shown clear improvement over the past year. The Indian government recently resumed direct flight with China, reinstated visas, and eased restrictions on Chinese investment. However, the long-standing border dispute between the two countries remains unresolved. And meanwhile, New Delhi continues active infrastructure building in the Himalayas and has activated the Indian Air Force Base in Ladakh to prepare for potential resurgence of conflict with China. So how can India strike a balance between economic and security priorities? What impact will China's continued support for Pakistan have on the fragile China-India relationship? And what opportunities or challenges will the outbreak conflict in Iran and the Middle East bring to Beijing and New Delhi? To unpack all these issues, I'm joined tonight by two distinguished guests. First, we have Sana Hashmi, Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation Fellow, and we have Manoj Kumar Panigrahi, who is Jindo School of International Affairs Associate Professor. Manoj, Sana, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
As we know, India-China relations hit a low point after 2020, but by the second half of last year, India has gradually eased economic restrictions on China. And that includes resuming direct flights that have been suspended for 5 years, shortening business visa processes to within 4 weeks, and partially exempting Chinese power and coal equipment. So I want to start, I think, with Sana, with my first question, which is this gradual restoration of dialogue and economic engagement between the two countries. Why and why now?
I think there is a nuanced reality beyond whatever we are seeing right now in India-China relationship. I won't call this easing of relations and easing of investment, starting off direct flight. It's not a reset. I would call it a calibrated stabilization, because the fundamental issues remain very much there, very much on the ground. So nothing much has changed with respect to the security issues. The idea is to restore normalcy, specifically with respect to what's happening globally. Multiple wars are going on. So I think this is just an idea that maybe with China, India could have some kind of normalcy. But the timing doesn't really reflect any convergence. I think what it reflects is that there are compulsions. And if we just talk about the economic stabilization, somewhat stabilization of the relationship, I would say that economic quotient is very much needed right now. But economic pragmatism is being used by India when it's necessary. So I think it's out of compulsion, and then engaging with China is India just has to go for it. But India has been and is still very, very cautious with respect to China.
Right, so not necessarily a warming per se, but as some kind of return to normalcy in that sense, return to the mean almost. And I would ask Manoj for my next question, which is that we talked about how India has been easing some restriction on China, be it investment, be it resume flights, visa, and other regulations. So what do you think are some of the economic or security drivers behind this resumption of relations?
My idea would be it's more about de-escalations rather than normalcy. But yes, this can be looked at into two different ways. One would be the strategic part. The strategic part, especially if you see post-Galwan incident, I would say Doklam. People, when we talk about Galwan, we also forget what happened in Doklam in 2018 with Bhutan and India and China. So post-Galwan, the incident that occurred in June, followed by which in the month of, say, August, late August, when Indian Army came out with Operation Snow Leopard, that's when we captured the major heights. That gave us the leverage to engage with the Chinese in terms of military discussions, and so do the other countermeasures. So that was the key on the strategic part that led to what we see right now as a de-escalation on the borders, right? But on the economic front, if you see historically, since India and China's trade relations, it's always been huge, like it's always at the number one for India. And India accounts about, if I recollect correctly, the last year data of India-China bilateral data, it's about $155 billion US. So that's, but out of which I would say the major part, the most beneficial part, almost $100 billion are imported by India from China, and that gives about a huge trade deficit. So these are some of the keys, I think, that leads to this engagement.
Right, so significant economic and trade consideration there for sure. And indeed they are, we all know about 2020 incident, but they're actually a longer history going farther back than that, isn't it? And so, Sana, I'm wondering, we know that India and China, they signed a 2024 border patrol agreement as a way to sort of manage tensions. However, since then, do you think there's been actual meaningful substantive progress, if you will, on the border when it comes to military deployment?
I think that's a very important question, but also briefly, let me add to what Manoj said.
Yes.
About the economic drivers and strategic drivers. There are both, there's a mix of both. So of course, there is persistent economic dependence, specifically from India's side. There's huge trade imbalance, which China is absolutely doing nothing to address. Then apart from that, India's import dependence on China in critical sectors. And India doesn't really have a lot of options. So as I already mentioned, it's out of compulsion. But what India is doing, India is looking at risk-based screening and then maybe somewhat border stabilization. But now coming to the important question that everyone is asking about the 2024 agreement, is it really happening? Of course, it's another confidence building measure. There have been multiple confidence building measures specifically since the 1990s and 2000. But what happened after Galwan was all these confidence building measures, all the agreements that were signed were violated from the Chinese side. So I don't know if there's any respect from the Chinese side or if there's going to be long-term respect on the sovereignty issues from China. We have no idea as of now. It is good at the moment. It definitely led to some reduced friction, but then India's approach was always that the dialogue, at least at the diplomatic and military level, if not at the highest level, it should be resumed. India never suspended the dialogue. So reduced friction is just not an outcome of the agreement that was signed in 2024, but it has been in continuation, it has been in progress. I won't really call it a transformative agreement. I think we have to wait and watch. But of course, for now, I would say that it is absolutely something that's substantial.
Right, all right. So one useful building block in the broader CBM, confidence building measure metrics, but there has been violations apparently from the Chinese side as well, in spite of the agreement. So I want to ask Manoj, just to expand on that. We know that in addition to that agreement, there's been also resumption of higher level military talks in late last year, for example, and apparently a strategic dialogue in February of this year. Do you think India and China, they have established enough early warning mechanisms as a way to prevent repeat and resurgence of such conflicts as 2020?
Okay, your question about the current CBMs, these are the CBMs that were there before. Just to echo what Sana just mentioned, these CBMs were violated. And that's why the hotlines were not respected whenever there was a troop escalation or let's say there's a troop engagement on both the sides, which saw losing of life from both the sides, right? So this high-level talks, yes, those are there. I think India and China are too big enough for each other to ignore for too long and too less as well. So I think that's where you see both the sides coming together and have the high-level talks, whether it's doing the BRICS talks or the SEO summit last year. And the mutual visits from the both sides. I think that's the signal that we are looking for.
Right, okay, so let's see where they go. So this important relationship, the elephant and the dragon. There's one other factor here in this important South Asia chessboard, and that factor is, of course, Pakistan, another major power in the region. We know that for a long time, the trilateral relationship among China, India, and Pakistan has been highly complex. Since partition, conflicts between India and Pakistan have never really truly ceased, while China has maintained a long-standing partnership with Pakistan. China's supported and supplied weapons have also been frequently used in India-Pakistan conflicts. Take a look.
We have never recognized the so-called China-Pakistan boundary agreement that happened in 1963. We have consistently maintained that the agreement is illegal and invalid. We do not recognize the so-called China-Pakistan economic corridor either, which passes through Indian territory that is under forcible and illegal occupation of Pakistan.
During the May 2025 clashes between India and Pakistan, we know that Pakistan used a number of Chinese weaponries, like PR-15 missiles, J-10 fighter jets, for example. So Sana, how big a factor do you think China's involvement has been in changing the military balance on South Asia?
I think it's already established that China was a third party in the conflict, and I would actually go ahead and say that it was a conflict between India and China, or not really India and Pakistan. It was all Chinese weapon, and this is what the Chinese sources also said, that Pakistan could whatever, because there was a lot of narrative perception that they were trying to establish. And also what we saw, it was just not the hard power, but also the disinformation that was coming out from this China-Pakistan nexus was actually mostly from the Chinese side. So I think India was already aware of the military nexus that has been going on between China and Pakistan for decades. India is not oblivion on that front. But then I think for the very first time, what was taken seriously and what was actually seen, that there is this nexus on disinformation as well. And that was picked up by the Western media without even really relying on the Indian sources. So I feel that they were very successful in that, and perhaps that was a time that Indian establishment, Indian government, and also a lot of people online realized that how important it is for India to also establish its own side of the story and what was the reality. So it took some time, but India came up with what actually happened. But it was primarily because of China, and Taiwan is it's a victim of disinformation from the Chinese side. So this is something that exactly how India and what India also experienced. So of course, this China enabling Pakistan is something that India is very well aware of, the two-front threat that India is experiencing.
Right, so this conflict and contestation, if you will, takes both a hard power and a soft power element to it as well, isn't it? Including all the disinformation, potential influence, warfare operations. So I guess a similar question for Manoj as well. I think, how do you think India views China's involvement in South Asia's contestation, especially on weapons acquisition and perhaps intelligence sharing, for example?
Well, if you see, again, since the establishment of PRC, if you pick up the history, you will see Chinese have been involved closely in terms of formation of communist parties in South Asia. We can say Nepal Communist Party, and they were closely involved with it. And also in 1963, when Pakistan and China had an agreement where Pakistan handed over a patch of land that it had occupied in the Jammu and Kashmir to China, that brings China into the question, into the picture of South Asia and the Jammu and Kashmir. And regarding arming of the nations in South Asia, it would be even in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, the Chinese were closely involved in the Sri Lankan civil war. The Chinese weapons were openly used. In the Bangladesh, they have a great number of submarine deals and fighter jet deals almost there. But as you mentioned, and even Chana mentioned about the Chinese weapons used in the May 2025 clashes, not to forget the drones that were coming from Turkey. So also there was a Turkish angle to the supply of military weapons. So that's a bigger picture, and I think this is nothing new, and I think it benefits China if it can subdue India in South Asia itself rather than challenging itself beyond South Asia.
Wow, so truly South Asia being a geopolitical crossroads in that sense, isn't it? And China's involved not only India, Pakistan, but also Sri Lanka, Nepal, and perhaps elsewhere. Yeah. So thanks for the broader overview. I think that's really helpful. Sana, I want to ask you about one other thing about China-Pakistan relationship. In Chinese we call it Batie, which translates into China thinking of Pakistan as one of brotherhood of steel, unbreakable bond, if you will. And yet, at the same time, China also tried to maintain economic ties with India as well. So how do you think China is balancing these two ties?
That's a very good question, actually. But I would say that that's actually true. China has come out and stated that there is actually this iron brothership and friends forever and all these terms that China uses. And absolutely there is strategic convergence, and that's primarily because of India. There is collusive threat to India from both the sides. I won't really say that China is trying to balance. What China is trying to do is to contain India. And I think there is this illusion of economic dependence, and then India and China could be the countries that could cooperate in the global south, in South Asia, in the Indo-Pacific region. But then how much China is actually giving India. I think we all have seen. And also in India, I think there is no doubt about how bigger a threat could come out from China. It's actually becoming a reality. It has become a reality. Of course, China-Pakistan nexus exists because of Pakistan. And Manoj also very well explained about the South Asian dynamics. It's primarily how China is trying to take advantage of this sometimes hostility between India and the South Asian neighbors, as of course neighbors fight all the time. But then China is taking advantage of its position, its economic dependence, and its military power. And it's all against India. China wants to be in South Asia only and only because of India. And I don't think that China has any interest of India. It doesn't really respect, be it sovereignty interest, be it economic interest. India just doesn't respect it at all. Sorry, China just doesn't respect it at all.
All right, so I think we've talked about a number of imperfections, let's say, in terms of China's involvement in South Asia. So let's try to be positive for a second. Manoj, what do you think from Indian perspective, what do you think what kind of Chinese presence or behavior in South Asia do you think India would prefer to see?
I would say it's very difficult in terms of strategic terms, if you can say, because of the ongoing tensions between both India and China on the borders that we have seen. But where we can find China being as a partner probably will be in the AI and other high-tech innovations, or say critical minerals, which are crucial for development into machineries or those kind of support, or say Chinese shipbuilding technology, or those sort, which China really have went ahead as compared to other countries over the years, and the level of R&D that they have. I think that's where we think China can be accepted. I would say climate change that goes beyond any strategy. That is something that can be worked together. But also, it's very hard to say. If you go a bit extended South Asia, if you look into Afghanistan, you see the Chinese were closely involved post-Taliban takeover, closely involved taking over the mines, like mining the mining industry to bring them back into China and to process them and so do the exports and all.
China is stepping into the vacuum left by America.
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, speaking of economic cooperation potentials, and I think more broader extended South Asia, I think one important factor that everyone has been paying attention to, of course, is the conflict in nearby Iran. And so let's explore a little bit more. So after the outbreak of the Iran conflict, both China and India, which are both major crude oil importers from the region, they are both facing risks to their energy supply. It is estimated that about 40% of China's oil import pass through the Strait of Hormuz, while roughly between 40 to 60% of India's oil imports also come from the same region. China and India, of course, they are also among the few countries whose oil tankers are currently allowed by Iran to pass through the strait. So at the same time, though, India has asked China to ease export restrictions on urea, which is a key fertilizer ingredient, to help address India's domestic shortages. Beijing, for its part, has yet to issue an official response. So I think, Sana, I want to ask you about this. What do you think has been the impact of the Iran conflict on India-China relations? I mean, from energy to fertilizer supply chains, how do you think the conflict is pushing China and India towards either more cooperation or perhaps more concern and uncertainties?
I think if I have to talk about a commonality, it's just that they're concerned about their energy security. There's vulnerability there. But I think there are parallel vulnerabilities rather than strategic convergence and an idea of India-China cooperating together. I think they both have very different interests and very different roles when it comes to Middle East and when it comes to Iran. In fact, I think China is also opposed to India's cooperation with Iran, India's presence in Chabahar port. So, we talked about South Asia and what would India would have expected from China. That's a very hypothetical question, and China is never going to do anything that is in India's favor, especially in South Asia. But a maybe less securitized role of China in both South Asia and the Middle East. So I feel that's India. I don't really see India and China cooperating together in the Iran conflict or in Middle East, for example. But I do feel that perhaps to safeguard energy security. But even if you look at the Chinese discourse right now, specifically with the energy vulnerability, what they're talking about is China has diversified and China might be less impacted. But countries such as ASEAN countries, India, South Korea will be much more impacted. So I don't really, because I feel that they might see it as a leverage and not really as an area of cooperation with respect to India. So I feel there is lack of cooperation sentiment from the Chinese side than the Indian side.
Right. So even in spite of this energy crisis, one would think that stabilization of energy supply would be one major public good that will be shared by everyone. There's still scope for zero-sum game consideration, at least on the China side, it seems. So Manoj, I want to ask you, just to extend from that point, how do you think the Iran conflict is affecting India's economic and trade policy and thinking at the moment?
Well, as just to echo what Sana just mentioned and about this questions, pulling it together, India imports about 40% of its urea abroad, and to process this, the homemade urea or the fertilizers needs liquefied natural gas and other types of mineral or the crude oils, right? So if let's say I got some data that I would like to read it out.
Yes,
please. As per Government of India's data that was released on March 10th this year, it says that the current stock of urea in India has only increased over the years because of the strategic imports that India has been doing. At present, there is about 61.51 lakh metric tons, that is the Indian numerical system, as compared to 50.90 lakh metric tons as compared to the last year. And overall, India's stock in fertilizers have increased to 180.12 lakh metric tons as compared to 131.79 lakh metric tons in the same period. So it shows that this was something, we do have some sort of strategic reserve. And India's request or the imports from China, it's more on like a strategic alignment rather than more like a dependency on China.
Right. All right. So it's about strategic reserve management, but not quite dependency on China yet.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Because most of our urea, if you pick up the data, it's urea or fertilizers, all primarily are coming from Middle East and other parts of.
Okay. All right. And so, all right, so we covered the more economic and more trade resource front. Let's cover the more security front. And Sana, how do you think that escalation of conflict in Iran and the Middle East, how do you think that's reshaping the strategic landscape across the Indo-Pacific?
I think there is a highly likelihood that it will spill over to the Indo-Pacific as well. There's no doubt about it, as in it's just not going to be contained in one theater. We have seen already in Europe, Middle East has been going on for such a long time, and now imagine Dubai is being attacked. This is something that was unimaginable before this. The Indo-Pacific is absolutely, I say, that is the next flashpoint, and maybe China, there is a talk of China could take advantage of it when the US is distracted, but then China could also take this as an excuse of maintaining its presence in the Indian Ocean region. So naval deployment, more and more deployment, and I think it kind of gives China an excuse that I want to have more and more naval military presence in the Indo-Pacific, even in the Middle East. So absolutely, it's not going to be contained to one region. And we in the Indo-Pacific need to be concerned about China's expanding military presence.
Right, so precisely because there's regional volatility, it could potentially give China a reason to, or perhaps pretext to, expand their footprint on the security theater in the name of pacifying some international public goods.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. And on, I think, similar question with Manoj, really. We know that Beijing has been maintaining strategic tie with Iran. And meanwhile, India has been, in recent years, moving closer with U.S., it seems. How do you think these different alignment patterns between India and China is going to affect the relations?
Well, I would not say India's like warming up to US or China warming up to Iran. If you see India's positions, is more on strategic alignment and having that strategic autonomy based on its decisions that you can see on the ground or how India behaves. And probably if you see over the years of different conflicts, it is mostly the Indian diplomats have been successful in managing, let's say, bringing the Indian citizens out of the conflict to a larger extent, and also to like right now you just mentioned about the Indian tankers coming out of Strait of Hormuz without being attacked. So this shows that India also have a very close strategic relationship with Iran. And as we discussed about Chabar port, I think that was a major strategic angle to it. And also not to forget, like just to echo again what Sana just mentioned about Chinese military presence in the region, especially in the Middle East. China also have a naval base in the eastern part of Africa. So that's something that gives them a much further excuse to have a larger deployment and to see and understand how the Western allies or the American-led allies are performing or monitoring in the region on Iran. Yes.
All right, so let's see where India's direction in terms of strategic autonomy and maintaining that diplomatic flexibility is going to lead to for a further involvement of the region in the years ahead. So Sana, I think we are, of course, recording this in Taiwan. So any recommendation for Taiwan, how Taiwan should be looking at this evolving India-China ties?
I think there is no need to concern, and also to follow up on the last question, I think it's all interlinked. India follows multi-alignment strategic autonomy, and it's just not linked to the Western countries, China and the Middle East. Taiwan is very much a part of it. And even if there is an easing or a thaw in relation between India and China, it doesn't mean Taiwan-India relations will be impacted. This dehyphenation that has already happened. India considers Taiwan as an important economic technological partner. India really is very keen to have more engagement with Taiwan, and I don't think whatever China says and does with respect to that, that's not going to impact India-Taiwan relations. So definitely there is no way we have to be concerned about India-Taiwan relations.
All right, that's reassuring to hear. Manoj, any final comments from you? 20 seconds.
Well, that's again, nothing to worry. Just do what we are doing and just to develop from where we are right now. And rather focus more on people-to-people connections, direct flights, have more trade and more partnerships.
All right, people-to-people connections, that's going to be there for the long haul. That's the important part, isn't it? That's all the time we have, and I'd like to thank you, Manoj and Sana, for coming today. On behalf of our team here at Taiwan Talks, I'd like to thank you, viewers at home, for tuning in. Come check us out on YouTube, and until next time, it's good night from us from Taipei.